Hello class, let's look at Chapter 9, Infrastructure Security. Let's take a look at the main concepts you're going to learn in this chapter. There's 4 items here, so we want to kind of keep that in mind. There's 4 takeaways we should get from this chapter. Number 1 is the types of security appliances, which you might see, like hubs and switches and things like that. Number 2 is security software protection, and you might guess what some of that is, antivirus and so forth. Number 3 is how a secure design can aid and mitigate attacks, that is push off attacks, right? A secure design from the very beginning when you start connecting all the pieces together. And lastly, different access technologies and how they might be used. So let's take a look at that. Let's look at section 1 first, security appliances. And there's kind of a quick idea here, kind of a list. This encompasses more than just the devices. Let's go to the next page. Some common things, hardening targets. Let's go. Legacy hubs. Well, hubs are really not secure. They broadcast to every node connected to the network, and you're more likely to see switches where you can segment networks and divide them into sections. Keep one part, like a guest network, separate from it getting connected to the main corporate network. Port security. And what that is, there's multiple ports, like port 80, getting to a website. We look at the incoming packets coming to the network and see what port they're trying to get into and see if that is a common port to enter or if it's one that's not used often. All right. One of the big ones is firewalls, and that concept goes back to, we might think of duplex houses and apartments where if a fire were to start in one part of a duplex, for instance, that it couldn't spread to the other part. Maybe it's brick or some kind of material where the fire can't go across to the next, the unit, if you will. So we use that term in networking to keep, for instance, the World Wide Web, those maybe the bad actors out there, from getting into the internal network. And there's a couple things we do. We set up rules in, and we're talking more enterprise firewalls, that is dedicated appliances, not your internet service provider all-in-one modem, switch, network, and everything. So those appliances, those firewalls, they're designed to look and see where, to examine the packets, the data coming to the network, the header information that describes where did that packet come from, right? If it's coming from the outside network, then that packet should be coming from an IP address that's outside the internal network, right? So the packet filtering can examine that data, and it can then look inside the data and see what the payload is, what is in that packet that's coming into my network. So the firewall examines all that. There's rules that can be set up to check the source address. If, for instance, the address is an address in our internal network, then it wouldn't make sense that it's coming from the outside. So in that case, it's spoofing the IP address. So those are some things that the firewall can do. It's a very, very strong device. Let's see what else we have here. I'm going to thumb through this a little bit. Web filtering to make sure users can only get to certain websites. You know, there's a white list and a black list of websites you can go to. That can be very difficult to really maintain and set up to be efficient. And what I've discovered in corporations and businesses, a lot of times the emphasis has changed to employee training and training to identify suspicious looking emails coming to your inbox and websites if they look suspicious or they look okay, and then some testing to give you some examples of, is this a good email address? Does this message make sense? Would you suspect this message? If you did, where would you report it? That kind of training is kind of gaining a lot of attention now in corporations to make sure employees are aware of things. Domain name server filtering, that means I can look for content or a DNS filtering, a certain appropriate, those are like post offices in the web, right? You know, the DNS filter can look and see where that address is coming from and where it's going to, and is it forwarding me to the right address, things like that. At some point we're going to get to the software. Let's keep going here. Let's jump through here a little bit. Let's go to software protections. Let's jump in here, and I am in that, the filtering. Categories, URL scanning, all right, and you can subscribe to a list for this, and many companies do that. Let's look at the design of the devices, the infrastructure of the network. That's what this section number 3 is about. and we talk about really sensitive information on servers that really cannot get hacked, or what we call off the network or air gap. They're not on the physical network. Now, the only way to get to them is for someone inside to connect to that server. But that is one way to do it. The other is to segment the network so that, like I mentioned earlier, you might have a guest portion of a network, like at a doctor's office, that visitors can use, but they can't get to the main network, which might have patient information and phone numbers and social security numbers and things like that. Virtual LANs, that's become very, very popular. In the early days of networks, you'd have a physical box that with a server that would manage portions of the LAN and give services to the users. Now you have virtual versions of the LAN, which lets you get to the further segment in the network, and that's becoming very, very popular. Demilitarized zone, that is a zone from inside the network to outside the network, right? That's where there's special internet appliances set up to scan for information coming to the network. Zero trust. Okay, let's see what else. VPNs, this is very big. And traveling lately, and I think I've mentioned this, I'll subscribe to a VPN, and I've used NordVPN recently, and I'll just pay for it for a month when I'm traveling. I think it's $12 or $13 for a month, and if you were to subscribe for 2 years, it's under $3 a month. It's very cheap, but I don't travel enough for that to be important. But that keeps my network traffic secure. If you will, it puts all my packets inside another electronic envelope and keeps it secure so it cannot be viewed, and that's very important. Virtual VPNs are many ways how you sales forces out there getting into a corporate database for their clients use VPNs to keep their access secure. Many times they have cellular connections on their devices, but not always. So the VPN is really important in that situation. This is critical, network access control. So what that is any user getting onto the network has to meet certain requirements. That is the operating system up to date? Is there antivirus software on that system? Is it something that is old like Windows 95 and we don't want it on our network at all? It's not secure. So those are just things that we're going to do to protect users getting onto the network. And then we get to the summary. So we talked about this a little bit, network switches connect all the nodes on a network to get to the main part of the network, to the servers. Routers control getting from an internal network outside to the network and vice versa. We have access control set up for the users based on what level of function they have in the company for what data they can get to. There's firewalls. And again, the firewalls that we get for home use don't have many of these capabilities where it does stateful packet inspection to look at information about the header of that packet, where it's coming from, where it's going to. Do those addresses make sense? Is it going to the right port? If it's outside the corporate network, does it have an outside IP address or an internal IP address? And that's our clue that the address got spoofed if it's internal, because it's coming from the outside, right? So we immediately block those kind of packets. So that's really important. Proxies, what is that? That is a server that's put a special server, a proxy server, a kind of a good man in the middle, if you will. My computer is going to go to a web server in a company. It's going to hit a proxy server, unbeknownst to me. It's going to go through that proxy server and go to the content of the web device. Then the server that has those web pages and content and information is going to pass back through the proxy server and back to me. So that's a kind of a good man in the middle, if you were to keep things safe. Here's a concept that's really kind of cool, and that's the honeypot. And that is a specific computer setup device. It could be virtual, could be an actual box that has what looks like, really enticing information, like database information, which could contain passwords, and that would give us access to the network, right? But it's not patched. It's something that usually a user coming and breaching a network can get into and is blocked. But if it's not patched, there's vulnerabilities, and I can get into that server, and it lets me get into certain files, maybe files that are named, passwords, database information of customers. Once that file gets accessed, and it's really kind of a ploy, it's not an actual working file that's being used, Once that file gets accessed, the IT team gets notification someone's accessed the honeypot and tried to get into that file. And now we know someone's in the network. So a really interesting device. Intrusion detection is equipment specific network appliances that looks for intrusion detection, inspects the data packets that's coming into the network, and there's also intrusion prevention systems that stop things in their path, making those kind of approaches. We talked about virtual private networks, VPNs, to keep your data safe, and network access control that has to do with the endpoints and connections to the networks and having rules set up and antivirus software set up and present in those devices. I think that's pretty much it. So this is a short chapter, but it talks about the infrastructure of the network, and it is really kind of critical. So I think that's it. All right, good luck. Give me a question if you have any, and let's see.